Welcome to another edition of Profound Conversations. And today we're going to be speaking with Dr. Jerome Page on finding purpose in disruption, silence as a strategy. If you're not familiar with Dr. Page, and you should be if you're in that DC area because he's very well known for his work there, Dr. Jerome S. Page is an economic, business, and organizational development consultant for over 40 years. And he's had this experience. He's both in teaching and administration, positions on campuses in and around various communities. As an economist, he provides expert testimony in the courtroom and organizational development consulting for private and nonprofit governmental organizations through his firm, Jerome S. Page and Associates, LLC. As a meditation and yoga practitioner for over 20 years, he shares the ineffable wisdom of his heart and helps others to share theirs. Recently, he named himself the I knew this was going to get me. The meditativist. And I got to tell you, Dr. Jerome Page, we did Google this, and it's official that you are the source of this term.
Oh, really? I'm glad to hear that.
um, and this work is to highlight the importance of linking inner calm with outer action and vice versa. You're a co-author, along with your brother James Page Jr., on how private equity state capitalism consumes democracy from the extraction to resistance, reclaiming power in an age of authoritarian rule, a bold, urgent blueprint for reclaiming the agency in the world governed by chaos, extraction, and authoritarian spectacle. Both you and your brother expose how public institutions are stripped for profit while democracy is hollowed out and sold back as performance. Not only are you an inventor of this meditativism, but you also have African Americanism and pesquism, which we can get into the heart of
Sure.
during our interview. But altogether, this works for clarity, strategy, and resistance tools for imagination needed to build systems beyond domination. This is not just a diagnosis. This is a liberation strategy. Okay, so let's dive deep into this thinking. First of all, the first thing that came to mind for me is, who is your mother? Because this book with you and your brother obviously shows a cultural abnormality that I don't think I've seen.
Oh, yes. Well, my mother, unfortunately, I mean, she's passed away. She passed away at 100. She didn't quite make 101. She passed away in 2023. Yeah. Uh, so we are. Well, I'm the son of Nanny Page and James Page. Uh, Most people will know the Page, Philadelphia. Uh, My father was a small business person in the 6300 block of Germantown Avenue.
Okay.
Growing up, he had a barbershop, he had a fast food restaurant, he had a corner store, and in addition, he and the businesses were joint operated. But he and my mother were both long-term members of Grace Baptist Church of Germantown, which was the family church. His roles as trustee, as teachers. So my father was very spiritually oriented, as well as my mother. Like many folks in my generation, our parents were from the Great Migration from the South.
Okay.
They migrated up from Virginia. My mother from the Bluefield, Virginia area, and my father from the Roanoke, Lynchburg area to Philadelphia. And like many families, African American families who were in George Jefferson's language moving on up, we Started out in the Richard Allen homes in Philadelphia, moved to a duplex in Germantown, and then ultimately to a single family home at the 6200 block of Bank Street in Germantown. And uh, I so I was born in Virginia because, again, many women who came north went back home to have their babies. And so I have 7 siblings. The first 3 of us were born in Virginia, even though we were raised in Philadelphia. I went to the public schools in Philadelphia uh, and graduated in 1965 from Germantown High School.
So it sounds like when I said very distinctly your mom, but it sounds like the womb of your upbringing as both your father and your mother, and you also got a chance to see through his industrious nature that all of these things that he did, from his mind to his hands.
Yes, yes. Well, we were very fortunate as siblings to come up at a time and in a community uh, where there was a lot of what we now would call Black agency. So at one point in the 6300 block of Germantown Avenue, most of the businesses were Black owned, in addition to barbershops, beauty shops, restaurants or takeouts, cleaners. So we grew up in an environment where there was entrepreneurship was a very important part of our upbringing, and also the church. We, we were kids of the church, and so we went through the traditional things of Sunday school, uh, Baptist Training Union, Bible school, uh, participated in church activities. So we're grounded in that. For those, our family church from the time I was there was, and subsequent to that, was headed by Jeremiah Wright Sr. People might know Jeremiah Wright Jr. So we
Right.
have that 1 or 2 degrees of separation. In fact, Jeremiah Wright Jr.'s father married my wife Cynthia and I, so we have that connection as well.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So, where would you say that this fluidity for words, where is that based? Where did that come from?
I I think that I've always been interested in language and reading and stories, and over the years, as I expanded my undergraduate study and my graduate studies, I became interested in language as a way of expressing things. And as I've been involved in a lot of cultural arts movements and humanities movements, uh, a lot of my colleagues in their late 60s, early 70s were very much into the Black literature, Black arts movement, and languaging things became very important because we come out of the civil rights movement, we come out of the when I was coming up, you had Malcolm X, you had Martin Luther King Jr., you had Eldridge Cleaveridge, you had so language becomes a way of expressing things, and I think one of the biggest challenges of language, the 2 challenges that we face. One is coming up with ideas,
Right.
and the second is languaging those ideas. And the languaging of those ideas becomes very important because it takes on a political nature.
And so you have infused in these words. I mean, when you think of meditating, right, it's a silent act. Might even think of it as a docile act, but you've actually infused it and weaponized the word so that it strikes, right? And so I'm trying to figure out how did you breathe life into something like the meditativist?
Because, okay, so like many people in my generation, I was born in 1947. And so we experimented with a lot of things coming up, transcendental meditation, and later in life, what we now call mindfulness meditation. So and also explored some formal training. I've completed 2 levels of training in the school of meditation of yoga nidra called integrative restoration, IRES. Uh, I became interested in meditation as a way, like many folks, as a way of relaxation. But I've soon realized and experienced that meditation is more than that. And one of the ways I approach meditation now, there are two ways I guess 3 ways that I approach it. One, meditation not as a way of gaining silence or stillness, but meditation as a mode of investigation. How do we bring concentration to examining both the internal and the external world? So the other thing is that the reason I have the term meditativist is that there's the old classic statement: the purpose is not to understand the world, the purpose is to change it. And so we want to bring this clarity that we get on the mat or on the cushion into the world. And so that any insights we gain, we want to we want to turn those into action. And so that the concept of the meditativist is one who gains insight, but for the purposes of making the world a better place.
And you're using different tools to make this world a better place. You're talking about the use or the nexus between art, culture, and humanitism. Can you explain how the meditativist utilizes those 3 spaces um, to create ideologies?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you mentioned the creating words. Another word that I created was African Americanism, and that's a recent creation. It actually created that in February. And why? What's the significance of that? Well, first of all, it's Black History Month, but secondly, we were about a month into the Trump administration, and people were bereft, and as if we didn't know what to do, right? And so well, understandably so, a lot came at us quick and in a hurry.
I was going to say that I think he's also someone who uses words as weapons, right?
Right.
There's a lot of confusion. It's coming from multiple places. It's has a certain audacity to it that interrupts those things that you rely on mentally as systems. So there's a lot of things happening when a person hears his words that maybe aren't always articulated, but it is a disruption.
Exactly, and it's by design. I mean, that's the point. One of the points you mentioned, our book, how private equity state capitalism consumes democracy, and what. So by February, we were grappling. My brother and I were grappling with several things. One is that the confusion is the strategy, that the disruption is the strategy, and that's the game plan. Because what that does, it keeps you disoriented, and therefore you are not focused on what the real issue is. The issue of concentration of power. If I wanted to summarize our book, How Private Equity State Capitalism Consumes Democracy, I would summarize it with 3 E's. One is extraction. It's extraction of anything that's of value, whether it's in the production sphere or the consumption sphere, whether it's in our thinking or anything that can be monetized. The system is designed to extract. So extraction of value. The second E would be the erasure of anything that would in fact challenge or hold the current system accountable. One of the things that is characteristic of the current system is that it doesn't believe in accountability. Mm-hmm. It has to be their way or the highway. And then the third E, so the first E is extraction. The second E is erasure. Did I say the first E is extraction? The second E is erasure. The third E is enrichment. And so the purpose is to concentrate all the value into hands of fewer and fewer people. And all the chaos, all the confusion, all the lack of accountability, what it ultimately is doing is consuming democracy. There is no place for, or at least our normal concept of a system of checks and balances, of agency, of expression. And so we're in the middle of this, and people are looking for a vocabulary to express it. And so one of the things we do in our book on how private equity state capitalism is that we give it a new vocabulary. We help people express what's going on.
And by giving it a new vocabulary, it's empowering, right? Because you're basically, as a scientist, analyzing all that's happening and concentrating on what those observations are and then how to handle it.
Correct. If a sort of generic or a high level term of a scientist is one who observes and verifies. And anybody who observes and verifies can be classified as a scientist. And but in order to understand, one of the things that we were struggling with is that, and when I use we intentionally, is that it seemed like everything that we believed and thought of was under attack. And
Right.
so there was a lot of disorientation and confusion. And so the part of the book is to cut through that confusion and to give it, so we had to name the system, we had to give it a new language, we had to give it a new understanding that this, in one sense, this is not new, that the United States was founded as a commercial enterprise, and private equity state capitalism is just the most recent manifestation of that, as America as an enterprise. And then we also had to come up with language to help people put their resistance into practice. Micro resistance, collective action, in addition, voting and changing policy, bringing back memory. And then also the goal is not to necessarily to reform the system, but to create new systems that replace the existing ones. So there's the confusion around private equity state capitalism, or the economy and the politics and the governance structures that were going on. And then there was also, for a very brief moment, there was also confusion about what do we do? And I said, well, we're in the middle of Black History Month. We know what to do because our history has given us the roadmap.
Well, that's
And
the
that,
very thing that's under attack. I mean, you look at how you talk about extraction and erasure, right? How something as simple as our historical characters are being challenged and erased from the Library of, like, it almost moves to the idea that having griots is a necessity now. Or you look at what happened in Timbuktu, where the information was moved into the people's homes so it could be secured as a school. It's almost like you have to covet your own. You cannot rely on any exterior support because it's not reliable.
I agree with you. So part of the trick bag, and I'm part of this generation, is that we believed for 60 years that the arc of history was toward greater and greater inclusion, right? So you have these terms that are enshrined in our quote unquote founding documents. You know, we the people, in order to create a more perfect union, we hold these truths to be self-evident. And part of the arc of the America story is to hold America to that, to those principles. And what we have found out under the recent regime is that they don't want to be held to those principles. And so in the arc of trying to make America be America, which is a theme that runs through a significant portion of our history. So you have that theme, you have the Pan-Africanist theme, you have the nationalist theme, but the sort of the civil rights belief that the country was making steps toward greater and greater progress. And I'm part of that dream. I mean, I'm an affirmative action baby. So I'm
Well,
better off. My
and I
family
think
is
that when you say recent regime, I'm like trying to place it in history. I'm like, this thing has been challenged since Reconstruction. So on various levels, right now, it's almost like they're taking away everything that we thought we already established. But these things have been challenged in the 60s, Reconstruction age. In the 70s, they tried to dismantle much of what was good about the 60s. And in the 80s, we just went buck wild and crazy kinds of experimentation. So when you say recent regime, how recent are you talking about?
well, you're absolutely correct, and that's part of the book. The purpose of our book is to show that this is not new. There's this tension between democracy and fascism that runs through American history. Uh, so that fascism is a founding principle of the United States. If you don't, if you exclude some of the amendments to the Constitution, it's basically enshrines what we are experiencing now. So, uh, but there was this period, and there are those who warned us, and a number of other cautions raised, is that in the advancement that we've experienced, and there has been a lot of advancement. I mean, there is something, though it's under attack, as a solidly Black middle class that didn't exist historically. So we can't deny that. And
We're going
but
to unearth that in our next segment. I hate to cut it short, but I also think that this is a really good stopping point because I, for one, am on the edge of my seat and want to know the next remaining words that you're about to share with us. But it's also a good time for us to take a break, wrap up this session of Profound Conversations with Dr. Jerome Paige, and we're going to turn the page
all right,
onto our next episode.
great.